if you're Putin, right, you at that point say, well, if America doesn't have to take any need of international law, all those sort of soppy liberals in the West who criticize me, well, they're hypocrites, aren't they? Because the leader of the West is breaking the law. China, we all know that China wants to absorb Taiwan. Where is the West's, in a sense, moral position, as we get to 2027, which is when we all think it's going to happen? Where is the West's moral position in saying to China, you can't do that? So I just wonder whether you think that this irrespective of whether it looks as though in the medium term, Iran is a less dangerous country for all of us, and that's a good thing. Is there a can of worms that has just been opened?
I don't know that I think it's any more open than it was already. I mean, the truth about the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranian regime is profoundly hostile to the West, and I don't think anyone really disputes that. And you know as well as I do that every Western leader, really ever since we've been covering politics, you talk about Obama or Cameron, probably even going back to Blair, they sweated the idea that Iran was going to have an operable nuclear device. And they, when you talk to them privately, they said it was one of the biggest things that they were worried about. I mean, I remember Cameron saying that was, one of his earliest considerations was, we can't let Iran get a nuclear bomb. And you can make an argument that what Donald Trump has, and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to talk about the precise.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm just why don't we just assume? I'm asking a simple question. Let's assume, and I think this is reasonable, that he broke international law.
Yeah.
I don't think that's controversial. Should we care about that? That's all I'm asking.
Well, I think we possibly should care about it. I think in realpolitik terms, even possibly in international law terms, it may be more defensible than, say, what we did in Iraq or what George Bush did in Iraq, or possibly even what the Americans did in Vietnam. Of course, we didn't get involved in Vietnam and all the rest of it. So there's kind of I don't want us to give the impression that we think this is something new. This isn't something new. This isn't a uniquely. I think what is different is, and you're right about this, is that we are moving into an era where there's, maybe the pretense did have some value because it was a restraint. It was a restraint on what we might do. It was a restraint on what we might support. It was a restraint on what we might get involved in. And now it increasingly doesn't seem to be a restraint. And that possibly is problematic. And going on from that, the other thing that I think is problematic, for Keir Starmer.
Because there wasn't even, because at least in the run up to the Iraq invasion.
Yeah, there
were attempts to basically get the UN on side, to get authorization. It failed, right? But there was an attempt to have the rule of law behind us.
Yeah, and I some people might say, well, what difference does it make? We did it anyway. Like, the pretense is almost worse than anything because you're going ahead and doing it anyway. But I don't think that's quite true, and I think we probably agree on this because I think, the idea that you should comply with international law does restrain a lot of Western democratic governments. Traditionally, it has. Maybe it's not enough to restrain them to the point of not taking action when they've already decided to do it, but it's certainly a massive consideration and holds them back. And if we're moving into an era where that restraint just no longer exists, I think that is problematic. I also think there's a kind of more prosaic, practical British political problem, which is Keir Starmer's got to get off the fence more often, I think. I mean, I just don't think it's a good look to either come out and say Iran couldn't be allowed to get a nuclear device. I'm not commenting, it's for the Americans to answer on the legality, but we support it. Or say, we don't think Iran should have got a nuclear device, but we don't believe this was the right action. We don't believe it was legal and we don't support it.
The British government will not say whether it approves of the bombing. And the reason they won't say whether it approves of the bombing is because, as you and I have discussed, it is very unclear whether there is any legal. There may be a realpolitik pragmatic justification for Trump's bombing, but it is very unclear whether there's any legal justification for Trump's bombing. In fact, when I talk to, lawyers with deep knowledge of this, they think it was almost certainly in breach of international law. And we've got a lawyer who's prime minister in this country, and he does not want to endorse a significant breach of international law, which is why he's been so equivocal in everything he's said about this attack.